itself and how the whole mechanism in this neuron is protecting. And it's fascinating study, and there is a lot of short-term memory, long-term memory, responses to environment. And what is fascinating that in our brain, the sensor which have to protect our eyes, to blink when something gets off, is very close to this. The mechanics is very similar. Even though we haven't shared ancestor for billions of years with this ESLUG, the mechanics of neuron is very similar. And now we're building very similar type of neurons in artificial intelligence tools. So you can think about continuation of the evolution that is going for billions of years. So, you heard these numbers. We have huge number of neurons, huge number of synapses in our brain. The number of synapses is more than stars in the Milky Way. Our neurons conduct a lot of information. There is a strong information going through our brains, and this information is controlled by many complicated processes. And there is a lot of interaction. This is how we work. And we're trying to replicate this with artificial intelligence. At the moment, it's assumed that latest ChatGPT has 1.8 trillion parameters. So it's still much less than what our brain has, this amount of parameters to deal with. But we can see that there is a very interesting comparison, and we don't know how in the future we'll continue to compare our brains with the brains that it's in artificial intelligence. And in a very simple way, you have seen this many times, I'm guessing, machine learning, what is doing, there is an input, there is output, and there is a neural network that propagates information from input to output. There is a lot of interconnections similar to our brain, and there is activation functions, all these pink or magenta dots represent neurons, which have some algebraic expression that works to propagate information. And these kind of activation functions are very simple mathematical expressions which we have tested and explored and found that it's working very well to replicate what real neurons are doing. And in general, you have two states. One is inactive, I don't care what is happening, and the other one is yes or maybe, or some kind of level of acceptance of the input. And what I'll show, I'll start like a very simple example, is different way to build a machine learning model, which is based on decision trees. And these decision trees is very similar to the way we are making decisions in our real life. When we want to decide, do we want to go for dinner with somebody, or do you want to go on a date, or do you want to come to El Salon to hear talk? So in all these cases, we're making decisions, and when you're building these decision trees, we're going through multiple gates, yes or no, maybe, and this is the way that the decision trees are working. And I'll show you an animation how this example works. And this is from analysis of machine learning model that was built to predict his apartment from the Airbnb database in San Francisco or New York. And there is information about the apartment, how many square feet it is, how many bedrooms, blah, 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 a lot of information. But ultimately what the machine learning model is built is to distinguish two different data sets. And this is how it works. It looks like dropping balls through a game. And if the dot is blue, I believe blue is New York and the green is San Francisco, maybe the other way around, I don't remember. But ultimately this animation shows you how the training process continues. So the goal is the balls that are blue to go on the left and which are green to go on the right. And machine learning is building this complex tree to decide should we go left or right. And at every single point the gate is some kind of decision point. Is the square footage certain, or how many bedrooms you have and how many bathrooms? But at the end, machinery is built, and it's very similar to our natural decision process. The other example which I want to show, which maybe you've seen many times, is the example where machine learning algorithm is trained to distinguish numbers that are handwritten, and there was a lot of experiments and tests to build machine learning about this, and I'll just show you an example how efficiently this can be done. So now this is a real app, and you can draw something here, you can draw 2 and to decide that it's 2, but if you add another number next to it, maybe we'll try to distinguish those 2 numbers, or something which is gibberish, maybe think that this is 6. But in the end, you see that there is a lot of information propagating through the neural network. For example, I'll give example with 6. So this is 6, and you see this 6 is propagated through the network, and at the end, the algorithm makes decision, this is 6. And this is training, this is a lot of similar process to the way our eyes process information, that collects information from what is in the square to just make final decision what is in the square, what number is in the square. The other example which I want to show is related to, and by the way, these articles and this research that I'm quoting is from people from Google and OpenAI, and some of these papers were published like 10 years ago or 5 years ago, so there is relatively old work in artificial intelligence. This particular paper is looking and trying to understand a complex machine learning network that is built to recognize cats and dogs, how looks at different portions of the image, and how distinguishes what portion of the image is associated with different animal. And you know that this is working because we're using it almost regularly in our social interactions when we post images of cats and dogs, and machine learning algorithm recognizes them. But what you can see now is that this how parses the algorithm of the image and sees that there is different types of dogs in different portions of the image, different types of cats. You can also propagate, I mean, going back to the issue, understanding how the brain works. We cannot perform this kind of analysis on our brains, but with artificial intelligence network we can propagate the information and see in different squares of the image what kind of animal the algorithm is seeing. So there is a lot of ways to interrogate and to understand how and what the machine learning algorithm is seeing. The other example which I want to show is again from similar research from Google and OpenAI, where they analyzed again the brain of the artificial intelligence, and they wanted to look, for example, different images, for example, USA, how it looks like to the computer, what is the images, collection of images that creates a representation of what US is. Or Donald Trump or Elvis Presley. So if you click on this, you see some collection of images that the algorithm collected by training and found some kind of commonality and some kind of similarity in the representation, and after that uses this kind of information when this is new image to be able to say, oh, this is Elvis Presley or this is Lady Gaga, and this is potentially image made from USA or Europe. So all these images kind of condense and synthesize and looks deeper in the neural network, what extracts from the training and how it applies it for prediction where the image is coming from. So I'll switch now to the generative AI and large language models, and this is kind of really the more hot topic and people more thinking about this. So the simplest way to think about large language model is to think as a giant typewriter, which has all the not letters, but all the words in the English language. Let's assume that this typewriter has 50,000 keys, and every single key is associated with a word in the dictionary. And what the training is doing is trying to find all the connections between the words, so that learns once you see one word, what is the probability next word to be something else. And this process is very consuming, and a lot of exercise is needed, a lot of connections, and all these neurons and synapses connecting the keys with the actual word needs to be trained based on the training data. But at the end, once, for example, you type once, this algorithm can identify the most probable next word will be upon. Or if you go to the more words, then becomes more complicated. Then the algorithm needs to investigate 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 words backwards to decide which one word is the next. And these algorithms are very challenging to be developed. There is a lot, much more complexity than what I'm showing here. But at the end of the day, really it is prediction what is the most probable next word, and the word after that, and the word after that, and the word after that. So this is how the generative algorithm work, and trying to solve the problem to predict the next word that we'll need to put in the sentence that we're typing. So now what I want to switch more is what we're doing at the moment. And what we're doing is called science-informed AI, or physics-informed AI, where we're using information from science and physics to inform artificial intelligence. So this is different, but not, I mean, the machinery in many ways is similar, but what we're doing is that we have, over the history of science, we discovered a lot of equations, a lot of types of models that can be applied to predict given processes, and instead of letting the machine learning algorithms to find these relationships by themselves based on the data, we use these models to inform the machine learning process. So you can think about this like a accelerated or science-infused machine learning process, which makes predictions more reliable, more faster, with less uncertainty and higher accuracy. And what I want to kind of relate is that in the history of science, we have been dealing with these kind of big domains of data, physics, and math, and in the intersection of data and physics is what typically is called experimental research, and on the interaction between physics and math is typically what is called theoretical research. The interaction between math and data is what traditional machine learning is doing, and what we're aiming is what is in the center, this physics-informed machine learning, where we're building all these 3 blocks together. We're not separating and ignoring all these 3 areas. There was also a recent book that was published by Microsoft Research, which emphasizes something which they call the 4th paradigm of science, where, again, similarly to the concept which I was showing on the previous video, they distinguish 4 major stages of scientific development. And I said that empirical science, theoretical science, computational, and data-driven. And you can find the parallels of the years, more or less, when these kind of domains became more dominant. The data-driven science is mostly in the last 10, 20 years. The computational science in many ways started at Los Alamos National Lab, but with the development of the nuclear bomb and the first computers that were applying to make science predictions. Theoretical science, of course, Newton and Einstein and all the people that use paper and pencil to write complex equations. And empirical science is all the observational science which we have been doing for such a long period of time. So that's why I'm connecting to what started from the very beginning. We are potentially a really have the opportunity in more advanced, coherent way to analyze data, physical understanding, math, to be able to solve more complicated problems. And one example of earth science environmental problems that we are working is, for example, to predict the drought in Colorado Basin. And this is from a paper, initial research that we have done with our colleagues. And what we want to do is, based on the information about watersheds in the Colorado Basin, information like precipitation, vegetation and temperature, to predict what is the future impact and predictions about drought within the region, which is important for our water supply. However, there is a lot of complexity in this kind of system. In many cases, in earth science problems, we don't have sufficient amount of data. We have limited observations. Some of these observations might be uncertain, might be associated with measurement errors. We also have inaccuracy in the data collection. We don't have at all that much information as we have images of cats and dogs. So it's very easy to train machine learning model to recognize cats and dogs. Building machine learning model which understands how temperature, vegetation and precipitation impacts drought predictions is very challenging. And the other thing which is important is that over the years we have been developing complex physics models to solve these type of problems, which are using a lot of computational power, a lot of physics and math to build these models. But even though we understand the basic principles, we understand the fundamental processes, capturing these processes at the scale at which we want to make decisions is a challenge. So machine learning helps us to address these challenges, how to propagate more efficiently information across scales, how to make more reliable predictions, how to have less uncertainty in our analysis. So again, I will say I'm very optimistic what artificial intelligence can do for the science and how it can accelerate and improve challenges associated with energy and environment. So in this particular case, what we are seeing is that instead of having this relatively simple neural network, which has very simple algebraic expressions, we are adding actual physics information in the machine learning processes. So these large fat neurons in the center of the neural network are representing actual physical processes. They are not simple algebraic expression, they are preconceived knowledge about how infiltration occurs, how evaporation occurs, how groundwater flow occurs. So all this information helps and facilitates the predictions and diminishes uncertainties in our predictions. Now, the other way that we are doing machine learning with science information is to think about science AI when you have model in the loop. Maybe you heard the term human in the loop. It's commonly used for artificial intelligence where you have experts or people who facilitate the AI process and they double check or triple check the predictions from the machine learning model. In this case, what we're doing is just instead of having human checking out the results from the neural network using actual simulator, actual physics model that can be applied to evaluate how accurately we're predicting something. So what we are currently doing is that, I'm sorry, I need to use my mouse because my pointer does not show on the screens, but you can think about a bunch of inputs that we're getting, similar to what people do when they recognize cats and